When we manage fear on our own, we set out to control people and circumstances to absolutely make sure that no matter what, our fear, our dreaded outcome doesn't happen. And that fear of that dreaded outcome is driving me to these extremes. Security feels so good, right? Feeling secure, the opposite of fear there, it feels so good. So we can feel justified in whatever measures we take to prevent our dreaded outcome. Hello, precious people, and welcome back to another episode of Reality of the Delusion. I'm your host, Laura Gallier, helping you recognize deception, realize your worth, and right what's wrong according to your unique life calling. As part of my unique life calling, I am called to see my novel series, The Delusion, become a major film franchise, and it has been a major, long, uphill walk and journey. And so thank you so much for joining me on that journey. As always, I want to remind you, you can listen to this episode in an audio-only format, or you can watch it in video form on YouTube. My YouTube channel is at Laura Gallier. Speaking of The Delusion, I want to thank you so much, all of you who have gone to delusionseries.com and signed the registry stating that you want to see the Delusion feature film. That is very helpful to us. David and Pamela, you didn't say where you're from, but thank you. Sean, Jose, Jerry Lynn, Yatisha, Tina, all from Virginia, thank you so much. Kristen from Kansas, Elizabeth from Florida, Sabby, Michael, Lindsay, Yatunde, all from Texas, and Rachel from Louisiana. Thank you so much for being the most recent people to sign up. If you have yet to do that, you can go to delusionseries.com. Takes less than a minute. I really appreciate it. Much appreciated. We're talking today about the issue of fear and control, the relationship between the two. I don't have to tell you how prevalent this is, how many of us struggle with this. I can say as part of an update on the Delusion series and really just including you in the journey. There was a time, and I shared it in a previous episode, where motivated by fear and impatience and trying to control things, it causes us to turn a blind eye to red flags and warning signs. And I ended up partnering with a production company that actually was not a fit. Not long after that, there was another LA-based production company that expressed great interest in the Delusion. And they were the opposite of what appeared to be like a ma and pa production company. They were in Sony Studios. They had posh offices. We had to have special VIP passes to get through the gate, to get in the lot. I mean, it was all this, big deal. It feels very official. We sat down at a table in this very nice boardroom. I was told that they had a nice big check ready for me personally as the writer to hand over this intellectual property to them, to let them produce it. And I mean, who doesn't like the idea of finally making money on something you've been working on for many years? And asking them for some referrals of people they'd worked with to take their screenplay and make it into a movie. They said yes, they gave us referrals. Well, guess what? We called, we emailed, we had conversations, we did our due diligence. And people were saying, They took our development money, which is money that you put in initially to even get to production. It can be very large, even six-figure amounts. And people had entrusted them with their development money and either not had their movie made or felt like it didn't turn out well. It never even made it to distribution. And so, in actually talking to people, they painted a very different picture. And so because I was not operating in fear and control and turning a blind eye to red flags and saying, well, hey, it'll be different with us. We'll keep a closer eye on it, and just so eager to get going, because I wasn't in that bad head and heart space, we told them flat out no. We said it nicely, but we said no. And I believe that we saved ourselves some great heartache. So just want to encourage you today. I always try to give a principle when I give an update, just because this is not all about me by any means. It really is about you. And if you are in any kind of business venture, any kind of agreement, partnership, please do your due diligence. Follow up, ask the hard questions, get referrals. Don't be afraid to inspect what you expect and make sure that everything's aligning. Don't be quick to sign things, and don't feel bad saying no if it's not adding up, if you're seeing some warning signs. So yeah, all right. So let's jump into our topic. When I talked a couple episodes back about emotional stability, we talked about what emotions mean and how to decode emotions. For example, we said that anger is the feeling of injustice. We said that anxiety is the sense of being overwhelmed. And it just helps us to be logical and to reason through our emotions and make good choices and decide what our actions need to be. Well, as we're talking about fear today, what is fear? Fear is a dreaded outcome. Isn't that a good definition of fear? It is a dreaded outcome. So I'm going to go over just some quick points that I consider very important to know about fear. First of all, there are degrees to fear, right? You can be a little nervous, a little hesitant. You can be terrified. You can be petrified to the point where you cannot move or speak. There are degrees to fear. Many of our fears that we are still experiencing today as adults do date back to traumatic childhood events. They just do. I know. It gets to where it just seems old. Like, what is up with us spending the rest of our lives undoing harmful things that happen in those first 5 to 10 years? But thank God there is a path to healing. But honestly, it is a factual statement that many of our fears that we battle as adults do date back to childhood. And we have to understand that in childhood, as you know, we're not objective. Things that we would not necessarily find terrifying today can be terrifying as a child. I have a friend that said her mom forgot to pick her up at school. She got busy and she just forgot to pick her up. She's a little girl in elementary school. Well, she panicked. She thought she was abandoned. They were in the process of moving. And in her mind, and I still maintain this is where the spiritual warfare piece can come in her mind, she's hearing, yeah, they moved without you. Your family moved and didn't care to come get you and bring you to the new house. That was not true. Her mother showed up, apologized up and down, if I remember the story correctly, and took responsibility. And I do think her mom kind of laughed about it, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I got so busy, I forgot you. And she didn't understand that for my friend, this was a defining moment. She battled a fear of abandonment many years, decades after that, because, we wouldn't freak out like that, right? As adults, we'd be like, where are you? You said you'd be here. Or even if we didn't have a cell phone, we'd be like, they'll show up. We wouldn't think they just moved on without us. But as children, we often conclude really exaggerated wrong things. And then these fearful emotions are still with us and we're still overreacting. We still have a childlike perception of that fear that has not calmed down. It may have even gotten worse over time. And fear is associated with overreacting. As a matter of fact, one of the ways we can recognize, whoa, I think I must be experiencing fear, because it can so often be subconscious, is we find ourselves overreacting. That can be a sign, whoa, I have fear going on here. Another very important point that I feel like gets overlooked so often is that fearful emotions respond far better to love, meaning comfort, soothing, security, assurance, far more to love than to mere logic. And if you're like me, I'm given to when someone's explaining some fear they have, oh, let me just explain, let me just give you the rationale here and calm you down. And it's a totally different part of the brain where we experience emotion, and it can be resistant to logic, especially when we don't feel calm and secure. It's almost like we can't even hear it or receive it. Whereas if we will get into a state where we do feel calm, we do feel secure, we're much more receptive. I've given this analogy recently that when you have a kid who is upset from a nightmare and you want to tell them, really, everything's fine, there's no monster attacking you, the best thing to do first is to hug and hold and assure and let them calm down, the breathing, the heart rate, the whole thing physically, before we even try to go to logic, or they really won't hear it. I find this very helpful. I use this all the time. This is something that is incorporated into the I Am Worthy curriculum, mental, emotional wellness, and character building for students. I had a hand in creating that curriculum, and I absolutely stand by it and love it. That said, there really is two kinds of fear, and we don't want to miscommunicate this or fail to understand this. And this is so good to pass on to your kids. There is such thing as warning fear. Warning fear, meaning, wow, in this environment or around that person, I don't feel safe. You could also say, for example, standing too close to the edge of a cliff, I don't feel safe. Well, you shouldn't. That's the voice of reason warning you that either absolutely there's danger or there may be danger. It's the voice of wisdom. And ultimately, warning fear is trying to protect us from harm. It's a good thing. It's a healthy thing to heed that and to recognize it for what it is. Okay, this is warning fear. But then there's also what I call intimidation fear. And this is the voice of torment trying to stop us from doing something good, something worthwhile, something brave, something that takes courage. So this is the opposite of the voice of reason. This is the voice of torment. And it can be so helpful when you're experiencing fear to ask yourself, wait a minute, is this warning fear? And I need to pay attention and yield to it in that sense and take action to get safety? Or is it intimidation fear? And this needs to be overcome. This needs to be counteracted. I find that very helpful. Now, I've shared some of my fears before in previous episodes, and they come under the category that I want to talk about now, which is that some fears, they are terrifying, but they're very unlikely to ever happen. So, for example, I have a fear of sharks, but as long as I am not swimming in the ocean, I don't go around afraid, right, of sharks. They're not going to sneak up on me. I actually stumbled upon a new terror recently, and that is black holes. I knew what black holes were in space. It's where there's just this massive gravitational pull that's so strong that it's sucking in everything like a cosmic vacuum cleaner and destroying it, just utterly annihilating it. And it does seem terrifying in and of themselves, especially when you consider, yes, there are ones that are just some miles long, but there are black holes that are bigger than our entire solar system. Like, that just freaks me out in and of itself. But you guys, I recently heard what a black hole sounds like. Listen to this sound.
According to NASA, the black hole at the center of the Perseus galaxy cluster makes this sound.
Okay, I don't know about you, but that sound, oh my gosh, it sounds horrible, like wailing and torment, and it just absolutely freaks me out. But once again, I do not go around terrified of black holes because it's not like I'm exposed to them ever. And this is important. I'm going somewhere with this, y'all, because there are also fears that feel like real possibilities, though they're highly unlikely. And this is where we get our word paranoia. Okay, so let me give a very relevant scenario that plays out behind closed doors more than we even realize. And as I so often say, but I mean it every time, and I do make good on my word, I am going to do an entire episode on the issue of paranoid jealousy. What am I talking about? You have a scenario, we'll just say husband and wife, it could be boyfriend and girlfriend, it can take on different forms, but husband and wife, and let's just say it's the husband, he is totally devoted. He has no intention or desire to be unfaithful, to, suddenly up and leave his wife. He is committed to the marriage, but in her mind, it is very feasible that at any minute he could cheat, he could abandon, and she is paranoid. We will talk more about the traits and the characteristics and how this works just psychologically. But across the board, guys, there are many things that we can become paranoid about where the people around us are like, hey, it's fine. You don't have to lock your doors with 10 deadbolts and 15 chairs to block the door because you're just convinced that someone's going to kick the door open tonight. You live in a safe neighborhood. It's not that it could never happen. It's not that it's impossible, but it's highly unlikely. When we have paranoia, that is definitely fearful. That is definitely a form of torment, and it applies with what we're talking about today. But then there are those fears that are, you could say, a real possibility, or like it could happen. So let me give you an example. It is not likely that I'd get in a car and get in a car accident, but it could happen, right? Statistically speaking, it happens. I have a friend who battles a terrible fear of cancer. She's never had cancer. It doesn't necessarily run in her family, but she fears it, and there is technically a chance she could go to the doctor and have scans done and find out, wow, I have cancer, right? It happens, okay? Then there's things that are very likely to happen. What if I have a spouse or a child on life support, and I'm facing the potential fear that they're not going to wake up, that I'm going to lose this loved one That is a real fear. So that is not an illusion. That is not just being paranoid. Now, hopefully, if you've been watching long enough, you know when I build a case like this, I am going somewhere with this, somewhere very important. Let me say this. I want to revisit something we've talked about, which is shame-based fears. Shame-based fears. What is that? These are fears tied to a shame-based sense that I deserve it. So maybe I do have, we brought up a fear of abandonment or a fear of rejection, a fear of being exposed as incompetent. And I have a deep-seated fear, not just of that outcome I dread coming to pass, but it's tied to shame that I feel like that's really what I deserve. That any minute they're going to realize I'm incompetent, or my loved one is going to realize that someone would be better than me for them. And so I live with this shame-based fear, very tormenting. I've shared this before, but I grew up with a totally illogical brainwashing and belief system that if I were to be cheated on, it would be my fault for not being more attractive than that person that I was cheated on with. I mean, that's ridiculous. That totally violates the laws of love. But that at one point in my life was a very real subconscious fear, which is my next point. Fears can be subconscious, yet constantly influencing and motivating our actions, our decisions, what we're doing. My fears were subconscious until they all exploded onto the scene of my life. April 8, 2019 was the inciting incident, and I had to work through so many different fears that I was confronted with all at once. And I, while it was so hard, became very grateful because in the process, I became aware of how much I was doing, energy I was spending, priorities, goals I had that were actually tied to trying to stop a fear from happening, which brings us to yet another very important point, just like we talked about recently with pain, that in pain we choose a partner. I'm not talking about a friend or counselor, those things that can be good and we actually need. I'm talking about the nature of fear forces us to choose a spiritual partner, ultimately. If we are relying on ourselves, which in a sense is choosing a spiritual partner because it's choosing to turn away from any help from God. And if you have a biblical worldview, you understand that to reject God and his authority is to put ourselves under satanic authority. You say, I cannot believe you believe in all that. I can't even believe you believe the Bible's true. My last episode, I make a case for why I believe in the existence of God and why I believe the Bible is truly divinely inspired. It is episode 8. If you need to go back and listen to that, by all means do that. That said, when we manage fear on our own, guess what we do? We set out to control people and circumstances to absolutely make sure that no matter what, our fear, our dreaded outcome doesn't happen. That's what we do. No one has to teach us a class to do this. No one has to model this or instruct it. It is totally intuitive. When I'm afraid of something happening, I intuitively, even if the fear is subconscious, start to work to control people and circumstances as a way to prevent having to experience that thing I fear, that dreaded outcome, so that it won't happen. Now, as we navigate this on our own and we attempt to control people and circumstances, we become a controlling person. We are given at that point to manipulation, which is doing things with disguised motives, right? Because we feel like if we were forthright, it wouldn't be well received. So I'll find a way to do this in a sneaky, right-handed, know what the left hand is doing, manipulative way. We often lie, which is a part of manipulation. And we even lie to ourselves, which you can hear me say over and over, is one of the most dangerous, mentally, emotionally unsafe things we can do is lie to ourselves. That can lead to denial. Denial is a form of self-deception, right? Just saying like, I am afraid that I'm going to keep using this example. It's just an easy one to use. I am afraid that my spouse is cheating on me and I feel like I would die and I just couldn't survive if that outcome, that dreaded outcome came to pass. So when there's suspicious, a text message comes through saying, I had a wonderful time last night, love Veronica, I say, oh, that's just bound to be, a coworker talking about that meeting he said he had. And I employ denial as a way to protect myself because I feel like I just cannot handle it if my dreaded outcome comes to pass. And meanwhile, I'm doing everything I know to do to try to ensure he's not cheating. This can also lead to that paranoid jealousy we talked about, where I'm combing through every text message, where I'm constantly accusing, right? Where I am employing suspicion in order to protect, air quotes, protect myself from being cheated on, as if we could ever control anyone to the point where we could control them ever abandoning us or betraying us or cheating. I mean, that doesn't exist. And if you're saying, wow, that makes me feel really unsafe because I do have a fear of being cheated on, stick with me. We're going somewhere with all of this. When we are in fear and when we are attempting to control circumstances and people so that our dreaded outcome doesn't happen, we often take really desperate actions. We do extreme things. We're given to extremes. People have extreme cosmetic surgeries because they're so afraid of aging, right? You could probably think of all kinds of extreme things. You're welcome to put in the comments there on YouTube, desperate actions that come to you that, man, this is what I've seen, or this is what I admit that I've done. And really it was fear motivating. And that's why I say you can work this thing backwards. You can say, why am I taking such desperate actions? And that can help you identify what is the fear that I'm actually a slave to here, that I am serving, and that is become like this compass for my life that's directing my steps and is very inhibiting. It's really sucking the life out of my life. So one way or another, I believe that fear is the culprit behind, do I dare say, every mental emotional disorder, and almost always the culprit in relational dysfunction. There is fear there. It's often shame-based fear. And here's why this whole dynamic is so tricky, because fear is a bad feeling. It's a terrible feeling. We talked about the degrees of fear. Sometimes it's more than just a bad feeling. Sometimes it can feel akin to death, right? It can be that terrifying. And security feels so good, right? Feeling secure, the opposite of fear there, it feels so good. So knowing this, we can feel justified in whatever measures we take to prevent our dreaded outcome. If even, again, subconsciously, we say, well, I know I'm going to extremes. I know I'm working myself in just beyond all reason for this certain promotion, but I have to have this promotion, because if I don't get this promotion and I don't prove that I am so capable or smart or successful or whatever it is, then I'm going to feel like a failure. And that fear of that dreaded outcome of being exposed or feeling like a failure is driving me to these extremes. And therefore, because that feeling of failure and that fear of that is so dreadful, whatever I have to do, whoever I have to step on, whatever immorality comes into the equation, it's justified because I have to feel secure. And the way I feel secure when I am handling fear on my own is by doing whatever it takes to not experience the outcome that I dread. I know you're tracking with me. I know this is, in a sense, not complicated. Did you know that there are people having affairs that has nothing to do with sex? It has nothing to do with love. It has nothing to do with companionship. What is it then, you might say? Well, it's, for example, I'm afraid I'm not enough, and this man or this woman makes me feel like I matter. This boy or this girl, if you're a teenager watching this and you're not having an affair, you're not married, but you're, with someone that doesn't treat you right, but you're staying with them. Maybe you're afraid to end a very toxic, unhealthy relationship because you're afraid to try to make it on your own. So often, fear is causing us to do irrational things. Fear is the culprit, not just what it looks and appears to be on the surface. There are people that feel like they have to be the most important, most accomplished, whatever, successful, talented, beautiful, handsome person in the room, or they're going to feel small and they're going to feel ashamed and they're going to feel defeated. So it's fear driving them to spend a fortune on their, name brand wardrobe, and they have to have that exotic sports car, whatever it takes to look and feel and appear to be highly successful. All of this is coming from a fear, a shame-based fear of failure and what that would look like and what that would feel like. And you could probably sit and take a minute and think about where this even made entrance. Why do I even have that fear? And so we attempt to control people and circumstances, and this has a devastating effect on our relationships. And this brings me to a test, like a self-inventory test that I have for you. Ready? Are the majority of close relationships in your life with people who man please, people who struggle to assert themselves? Does that comprise the majority of your close relationships? Guess what that could mean? You're a controlling person. Not saying it's emphatically, but it's something for you to think about. Could it be that you are a controlling person, so you've run off assertive people because they won't put up with it? You've run off people who speak their mind and aren't vulnerable to manipulation and to guilt tactics, but you draw and keep people who have been conditioned to not assert themselves and to be compliant, right? Here's another aspect of the test. We're going to kind of reverse this. Are the majority of close relationships in my life with people who dominate me? Do I surround myself with controlling people? Well, guess what? I'm an overly compliant person. There's a time to comply and submit and yield to one another, absolutely. But am I overly compliant? Perhaps I grew up with controlling parents or controlling caregivers, and so now that feels normal, but it is not. It is not normal, and that is not healthy. It may be what we often see or have experienced, but it is not healthy. Any conversation about fear lends itself so well to the issue of spiritual warfare because fear is at Satan's core. Everything he does points back to fear. He is absolutely consumed with fear. And so when it comes to choosing a partner, I already made the statement that when we handle fear on our own, we really do ultimately come under satanic authority. There really is no gray area. Like, hey, there's God over there, there's Satan over here, I'm going to do my own thing. No, Jesus made this very clear that to reject God the Father, Satan is your father. It's right there in Scripture. Look it up, okay? When you refuse to believe the truth, you live in the atmosphere of lies, and there's always a lie tied to fear. I'll get to that. But what Satan wants to do is not just torment us with fear, but he also wants to be more manipulative and tricky than that. And he wants to say to us, I can help you. I can help you so that you're protected from this fear. It's exactly what we're talking about. He introduces us to actions. And again, I'm not saying you hear this scary voice and you have this conversation with this demonic entity. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about spiritual warfare that flies under the radar, that we don't even recognize it as such. We think it's just our voice. We think it's just our head telling us that if I do XYZ, my fear won't happen, if even subconsciously. And I am going to give an example. I've used this in person when I do speaking engagements, and I just find it to be one of the best examples of how this works. And you may or may not be a Star Wars fan. That's okay. I consider myself in the middle, right? My husband's a huge fan. My daughter Avery's a huge fan. You know, I watch them. I watch the movies. But there's a scenario that plays out in Star Wars that is a great illustration of how the devil in real life, Star Wars is pretend, but how the devil operates in real life, okay? So Anakin, right? He is the Jedi in training, you know, under Obi-Wan Kenobi. And Anakin has trauma because his mother, after he left his mom at Tatooine, I believe it was, to go train to become a Jedi, he finds out that his mother was raided and killed, that their village, whatever you want to call it, was raided and killed, and his mother was killed, and he wasn't there to protect her. So this creates trauma, and guess what? Anakin, against the rules of being a Jedi, gets married to Padme, and he loves Padme very much. Padme is pregnant. She's pregnant with twins who will eventually be Luke and Leia. I'm going somewhere with this. Stick with me. So Padme is pregnant, and at this time, Anakin starts to have nightmares, y'all. He is having nightmares about Padme dying in childbirth. And he's terrified and he feels helpless and he wants to protect Padme. What can I do so that this dreaded, fearful outcome will not happen? Well, here comes Senator Palpatine, aka in this story, he's a type of the devil being real, Palpatine being a made-up character. And he's a type of the devil. And Palpatine comes to Anakin and he projects himself as this amazing senator that cares about the welfare of the people. He's what the Bible will call when Satan appears as an angel of light. That's what we're seeing here. And he befriends Anakin. He's just met Anakin. Naturally, he's very flattering, has all this belief in Anakin. What he really wants to do is get Anakin over to the dark side. And so he baits Anakin through this conversation that he can give Anakin special powers even over death. Because Palpatine understands, he's so in tune with the dark side, that Anakin's been having these nightmares and he's telling him, I can give you the power over death. And Anakin's like, what? What would that be? The total ability to control outcomes and ensure that the thing Anakin dreads, that Padme, she is never going to die because he's in control. He would have power over death. So this begins Anakin's descent into turning to the dark side. And in turning to the dark side, I promise I'm summarizing this, but seriously, in turning to the dark side, Anakin takes that lightsaber of his. He ends up killing all the Padawans that are the little, Jedi children, which is horrific. He totally goes postal because he's overcome by darkness. And when it gets back to his beloved Padme, that he has gone AWOL with the darkness, and she confronts him and she's upset and she's like, surely this isn't true. What's going on with you? She calls him Annie instead of Anakin. It's so sweet. And he actually gets rough with her. And he ends up like roughing her up and she falls to the ground and she's devastated. Well, guess what ends up happening, you guys? Because Padme has a broken heart that Annie has gone to the dark side, and because he got rough with her, she dies in childbirth. Do not miss this. The very outcome that Anakin feared is what Senator Palpatine set him up to experience. And this is a great explanation of how the devil works. Let's go back to that scenario I talked about paranoid jealousy. Let's say you have a woman who has a terrible, terrible fear, a deep-seated fear of abandonment and being rejected, being betrayed, and suddenly finding out that the one she loves has betrayed her. Well, in partnering with the enemy and with that demonic world, we are now leaving behind the fairy tale of Star Wars. We are talking about the very real issue, biblically speaking, of spiritual warfare and how this plays out in real life. What will start to happen is the enemy will work with her own mind and emotions, her own psychology, which she is responsible for, and she will become paranoid and suspicious. That's where we start reading every text. That's where we start falsely accusing, right? Like, I saw the way you looked at that woman. And he's like, what woman? And he is truly innocent, but she becomes delusional in this paranoid state of suspicion, believing all the while that her suspicion is protecting her from being blindsided by the inevitable reality that eventually he's going to cheat, but that somehow in being suspicious, she's preventing him from getting away with it. Guess what happens? It either totally diminishes the quality of their relationship and makes for a miserable marriage much of the time, or he's so fed up with it, with the false accusation and the distrust, that he leaves. And the very dreaded outcome she didn't want happens. This is what happens when we partner with the enemy, which is akin to managing fear on our own. It can and often does backfire. The deeper into it we get, the deeper we get into the demonic influence operating as this partnership to, quote, help us in our fear, the bigger the consequence and the more horrible the outcome will come. And again, I want to restate, you can be sure of this, Satan's hope is that the dreaded outcome, the outcome you dread, is going to be what happens to you. That is what he hopes. He is that vicious and that cruel. So we've talked about our way of coping with fear. We've talked about how, the satanic way and the partnership we can form. What about God's way? What about God's way? You guys, God wants us not to run from our fears, not to try to control outcomes, but to face our fears head on. And you say, well, gosh, that's the very, thing that I'm afraid to do. I want to outrun it. I want to prevent it. I want to do everything but face it. Listen, there are over 365 verses in the Bible that tell us not to fear. And many of those verses are coupled with this phrase, fear not, for I am with you. Isaiah 41:10 comes to mind. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will help you and strengthen you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. That is one of over 300 promises where God promises to be with us and wants us to face our fears. I mentioned earlier that behind every fear there is a lie. I didn't say it's all lies. You say, man, I had a car accident. I'm afraid of having another car accident. It's not a lie that you had a car accident. It's not a lie that car accidents are scary. That's not where the lie is. The lie tied to fear is always an attack on God's nature. It always is. In other words, we fear that God's not going to be with us or God's not going to be faithful if that horrible thing happens, even just facing the fear. Like if the fear is, okay, I was molested as a child, right? I was sexually abused as a child, and I don't want to revisit those emotions, but I'm going to face that fear. I'm going to go back and revisit those memories and emotions and process through them and get healing. The lie would be, you got to do this on your own. God doesn't care. I mean, God's just got way too many other priorities out there running the universe. You're on your own. That God's not going to provide for you. Maybe you have a terrible fear of lack, of running out of provision. Maybe you've known poverty or you've experienced it. And so there would be a lie tied to the very nature of God that he's not going to provide for you, right? That would be a lie. And we have to be careful because sometimes, just got to say this, quick pile-on point, sometimes we don't use wisdom. So sometimes we say, well, I'm not going to work, or I'm going to have a job where I work 2 days a week and bring in, $500 a month, but I'm believing God for all this provision. No, we do want to exert wisdom and we want to do our part to partner with wisdom. But the nature of God's promises is they take care of us and kick in as we're operating with a fair sense of how God's nature works. And so we don't want to test God. We don't want to say, I'm going to quit my job and see if God provides. That's called being foolish and presumptuous and testing God. That's not of God. And Jesus himself called that out when he was tempted by Satan. And he said, no, we're not to test the Lord our God. So do your part, but know that when God has promises, he is going to come through. And I'm going to state again, every fear is tied to a lie about God's nature, or really just something we don't even know about God's nature. Can I count on God in that way? Maybe you've never even cracked open a Bible or seen one biblical promise, and you don't even know that the Bible is full of promises. You don't even know that. Well, that would be kind of ignorance is the word we'd use. I'm not calling you ignorant, but that would be ignorance in that you just don't know, right? What you don't know. But in that, there's a lie. So when it comes to partnering with God in our fears, we want to know his nature and we want to know what rights we have as children of God that speak directly to the fears that we have. For example, God has promised to never leave me or forsake me. So if I have a fear of abandonment or rejection, I can know that even, I'll quote a scripture, even if my mother and father reject me, abandon me, forsake me, which is to leave in a time of trouble, then the Lord will hold me close. The scripture says God's going to be there. He's never going to leave me. He's never going to forsake me. That is very comforting, right? That is taking the fear, acknowledging what it is, and confronting it with truth. This is all leading up to such an important concept and revelation that God's love is the opposing force to fear. God's love is the opposing force to fear in our lives, no matter where that fear falls on the fear scale, right? Oh, I'm a little intimidated, or oh, I'm terrified. God's love is the opposing force. 1 John 4:18 and 19 says it this way: there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment, does it not? But he who fears has not been made perfect in love, just means fully matured in love. And then verse 19, we love him, meaning God, because he first loved us. So we're not trying to earn his love. We're not trying to win it from our moment of conception. And really before the foundation of the world, he foreknew us and loved us. So there's no earning or performing there. What good news that is. As a matter of fact, so many of us struggle to feel loved, whether it's from other people or we just can't seem to accept that God loves us. This also ties into the subject of self-love. And I want you to know my very next episode is going to be all about the issue of feeling loved, because remember, this has to be more than logical. We have to feel. It has to be emotional too. So we will talk about that in our very next episode. It is going to save you thousands in therapy. I always say that, and I mean it. It is going to be very heart healing. In the meantime, know that God's love counteracts fear, and that control that we've been operating in actually is replaced by a soothing trust in him. I get it. It takes faith. In that last episode I did, episode 8, I talked about the fact that it does not take faith to believe that God exists. There is plenty of proof, and I will stand by that. There's plenty of proof that God exists, but it does take faith to believe in God's good character and nature. But as we exert that faith, we see him time and time and time again show himself capable and able in intervening on our behalf. Yes, he will step up to the plate and in that sense prove himself as we take him at his word, which is what he's calling us to do. Our trust in him is so important that he makes a statement in scripture in Hebrews that without faith, it is impossible to please God. Faith ultimately meaning trusting in his nature, trusting in his character, trusting that he's who he says he is and that he will do what he says he will do, even if it means waiting on it. Hello, poster child, as I'm walking out, seeing the Delusion become a major feature film. This is taking a long time. It is a literal lifetime assignment. And yes, that takes faith to not wake up and say, hey, God, you're obviously stringing me along. You're obviously not good. That's a temptation that I face. But I go back to, you say, well, what do you go back to? Yes, the promises of God, but the cross. It always comes back to the cross. What kind of God would send his own son to die in my place, be so selfless, so giving, and then you're going to shortchange me over here in this matter? No, I don't believe that. I believe that you're going to keep your word, and I believe that God made that promise to me about the film. Otherwise, I would just let it go. And there can be that time where you're like, maybe I missed God, and you didn't really promise that my book was going to be a feature film. I would be willing to concede if at any point I felt the Lord telling me that I haven't heard correctly from him, because obviously there's no scripture that says I'm going to make a feature film. That's not just like a blanket promise I can claim for myself, but I believe that he spoke that. And when I pray about it, as I so often do, I still sense that. And I have a team of people who sense that as well. I'm not just sensing that on my own, because how many of you know on our own we can get weird, very weird when we isolate and we do not have wise counsel. So when we partner with God, we turn our back on self-reliance, which is ultimately partnering with the enemy. We no longer base our security, in opposition to that fear, on how unlikely we are to experience our fear, dreaded outcome. Remember, that's how we coped before. The whole thing was about doing everything we could so that we prevent that outcome from happening. When we partner with God, it's no longer about obsessing over how unlikely. Remember, I went through that whole process. A black hole, is very unlikely. Okay, let's say impossible unless I go to outer space or a black hole sucks in the earth. I am not going to ever have to square off with a black hole. And then we said, some things are highly unlikely and then some things are plausible. Why did I go over that? To make this statement that we no longer base our security and how we're handling fear on how likely it is or isn't to happen, i.e. we come out of control. And now our paradigm is that even if the thing I so dread happened, God would be with me and would be faithful and would carry me through it. Do you see how different that is? One of them, we're trying to prevent it from ever happening. We're scrambling. We're doing all these things. We're really not in no way conquering the fear. We're honestly running from it. We're actually a slave to the fear when our whole life is about making sure our worst fear doesn't happen. I don't know of another solution outside of God and his love and his capability, because who else can be a rock in times of trouble? Who else can completely cover us from start to finish but an omnipresent God, an all-powerful God? Who else could even give us ultimate rock solid assurance, much less love us perfectly, except God? He really is the only ultimate answer to fear. And he relieves us of the bondage of having the fear, because when we realize, even if, God forbid, I was in outer space spiraling toward a black hole, God would be with me. And I say that in jest, and I want to be careful, because really fear is not a laughing matter. If you say, ha, yeah, that's funny for you, but the fear I have, I'm afraid my child who has cancer might die of cancer. There's nothing even remotely jovial about that. That is a very real and serious fear. But imagine knowing that even if that happened, God's love and presence and grace and the ultimate eternal life we have after this life, the hope of that, an eventual reality of that we will experience when we pass from death to life, if we are born again. It's not just carte blanche to everybody. It's if we receive Christ as Lord and Savior. I am no longer afraid. I'm not saying that we get to a place where we suddenly wouldn't dread someone we love dying prematurely, of course, but we can get to a place where the fear of that happening is no longer this horrific torment, because we know that God would be with us if the worst thing happened. And there are so many stories, you guys, of people choosing to put faith in God, and the situation turns around dramatically. I have a very small role in a movie called Show Me Your Glory. And in that movie, there are stories of God dramatically intervening. And one of them was in a child's life who was getting sicker unto death. And he did experience, that family got a miracle. But guess what else? There's a story in that movie about a family that had a sick child and didn't get their miracle. And when it comes to this episode today, I could take what I would call, in a sense, the easy way out. And I could share a testimony. I could bring on a guest who got a miracle, circumstantial turnaround, and never had to experience and walk through their most dreaded circumstance happening. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the courageous route, and I'm going to feature a guest, a friend of mine, who did experience a relinquish of control to God, and the circumstance went the way she didn't want it to go, the way she dreaded it will go. Now, you obviously know she survived, or she wouldn't be a guest on my podcast today. But did her faith survive? Did her hope survive? Is she a miserable, depressed woman, having had to face not just her worst fear, but what many, many parents would say is their worst fear? Let's hear from my friend Michelle. Michelle, I could not be more excited about having you as a guest. I've heard your story. And just take us back to 2021. You'd raised 4 kids. You're a new empty nester. And specifically about your daughter, Alana. Tell us what was going on.
She was working as a vet tech. She loved her work. She loved engaging with the people. She was very social. She had a few learning disabilities in school, but to see her overcome that, and for her, it was exciting because she would come home from work and be so excited and couldn't wait to talk about her day and who she met. And so it was just such a blessing to see her get to that point in her life. She was like the person that when she entered, everybody gravitated towards, because she was always just so happy and so peaceful and always building bridges and just wanted everybody to get along and be happy. She was always cracking jokes and being silly, and so she brought an element to any relationship she had of just joy. She was 26 years old.
Okay, she was 26 years old. And then talk about what your interactions with her at some point, you maybe started having some concerns or just wondering how she's doing.
So we spoke on the phone one night. She called me. She lived in California at the time, and I was in Texas. And she gave me a call, and she was having a struggle with a family member relationship. And she was trying to figure out how to navigate that. And it was really causing her some anxiety and just a heaviness that she had about it. And being a mom, we always want to insert ourselves and try to fix it and do this, don't do that, say this, say that. And I just felt something in my spirit that was just like, just be there, listen, tell her you love her, let her know I'm praying for you, and I know God's watching you on this journey right now, and it's going to be okay. And when we got off the phone, I just felt like God was impressing upon me, I need you to give this to me. I need you to give her to me. And after some thought that night when I went to bed, I realized, I need to give this to God because I can't fix it. They're adults now, and this is just part of life. They need to learn how to navigate certain things, and I'm just here to be a support system. But I was still struggling with the frustration of not being able to fix it or help make it better. And so that night I just laid in bed and I prayed for all of my kids and just called out to God and said, God, they're your children. You love them so much more than I do. And I know you want what is best for them and even more than I do. And so I'm giving them to you because I don't know how to fix this. And the worry and the stress it was causing me was a lot. And I learned that God never intended for me to carry that. The goal is for them to learn to turn to God, obviously, and to just be their support system for them. And so I prayed that, and I felt a peace about it, and life just kind of went on for a few weeks. I started to get some random phone calls in the middle of the night where she would call and it would disconnect, or it would ring a few times and then stop. So I would text her back or call her, hey, are you okay? Oh yeah. She would say, I'm fine. My phone's just acting up, and it's just very odd. But I couldn't really put two and two together. A few months more went by, and my son called at probably around 1 o'clock in the morning from California. He's in California as well. And I answered, and he said, Mom, the paramedics are here working on Alana. And I was in shock. I was like, was she in a car accident? What's going on? And he said, Mom, I don't really know. We found her slumped over on the floor of her bedroom, and I woke her up, and she stood up, with help, and she said she was just really tired. And so we put her to bed, and when we checked on her again, she was blue. So we called 911, and that's when he called me. And it seemed like an eternity on the phone. And I couldn't understand why they were not taking her to emergency. I didn't understand why they were still working on her at home. And I had my husband, who was there, call my mom and my dad to pray for her and pray for the paramedics, and they did just that. And my son said, Mom, she's gone. And I didn't really know at first what he meant. Because he said something along the lines of they called it. I said, what do you mean they called it? What does that mean they called? What did they call? And he said, Mom, she's gone. And my heart just sank. It was something that I didn't obviously prepare for. I was completely caught off guard. And I just felt like everything went black. I felt like somebody punched me in the gut, and it was it was the worst night of my life. I just spoke to her that morning. It was her birthday was coming up in a few weeks, and I was doing some shopping and showing her purses. You like this one or this one? Trying to get some ideas for birthday gifts. And she was at work and she's like, "Oh, I like the one on the right. But I got to go, Mom. I'm at work." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "I love you." And I said, "I love you too."
Wow. I can only imagine that it feels like a dream. It's bound to feel like, okay, any minute I'm going to wake up. And we know this intuitively, we employ denial because we just can't take it in. Talk about the days following. I'm sure you found out more about what actually happened to your beautiful daughter.
So, they had to do an investigation because of her age and not really knowing what happened. And they did an autopsy on her. And they ended up finding several types of medication in her system. Some were over the counter, and then there was also prescription drugs. They found Benadryl that she took every night for allergies and, working at the vet clinic. And they found tramadol, which I knew she had been taking because of a dog bite that she had. And they also found a Xanax in her system and weed gummies. Because those were taken within a certain amount of time and the way they were in her system, it was just a perfect storm. And it just slowly started to shut everything down, including her breathing. And I remember thinking, as a mom, when they start in school, junior high, high school, it's don't do drugs. The thing is, I think there's such confusion about prescription, over the counter, and street drugs. I mean, we have this perception like if you're on street drugs, you're horrible. And if it's, over the counter or, something you can access via prescription, it somehow makes it okay. And not that there's anything wrong with prescription pills by any means or anything that you get over the counter, but you have to be mindful of when you take them and how you're taking them, and even prescription, if it's not written to you, then you really should not take it.
Yeah, and so by all indications, she wasn't trying to take her life. I know no one listening right now would be thinking a condemning thought about her for doing what she thought was helping with these various issues she was having. It does also speak to that issue of wanting so badly to treat things, emotional things, without burdening, right? Family, without saying, I'm hurting, I'm struggling, I have anxiety. We try to cope. And sometimes in this situation, even though it was completely unintentional, it took a very wrong turn. So, talk to us about what you're doing in the next 24, 48 hours. What is your frame of mind and how are you coping?
It was the loneliest, darkest time I've ever felt in my life. And I say that because I remember my first thought was, who's going to help me? Who can help me right now? And the reality in that moment was I have to do this all by myself. And I don't know how to do this. How do you grieve? What are the steps I need to take? I want this to go away.
Hmm.
I don't know how to navigate it. It was just the loneliest, darkest feeling I think I've ever felt in my life.
Exactly. And my question for you, and I want to trace this throughout your journey, is here you had done this amazing thing of turning over control to the Lord. What are you even thinking, especially in this early phase, about God when you entrusted your daughter to Him and this happened? What are you thinking about God?
My knee jerk reaction was that God's punishing me through my kids. I didn't understand why he would take her when she was doing so well and so good. I was very, very angry and confused. And as a mom, when we try to do everything right, that we're, supposed to do, take them to doctor's appointments, have them play sports, do all the things, dentist appointments, encourage them, talk about God to them, everything. You feel like there's a certain amount of peace that you have as a parent, like everything's going to happen the way it's supposed to happen. Because that didn't happen for me, it was really, really a struggle because I felt like he had abandoned me and abandoned her and not given her the opportunity to live this life here. For me at that time, victory or success had a meaning of bad things don't happen when you do your best to do everything right. And so I felt like I failed her. I felt like I failed myself. We had gone, my husband said, let's go for a walk one night. And we went out for a walk throughout our neighborhood, and a sweet neighbor came up to me and she gave me a big hug and she said, Michelle, I'm praying for you. I just want you to know that I lost my son 7 years ago. She went on to talk a little bit more about her story. And can I tell you, after she said 7 years, I saw black. I didn't hear anything she said after that because I thought, how am I supposed to live like this for 7 years if I am struggling right now to breathe for the next 7 minutes? I don't know what to do. And I told my husband, I'm scared. I'm really scared right now. And I can't make it that long. I can't. I know I can't. And he suggested therapy. He said, let's find a good therapist. And that began the process of the struggle and working through the grief and the pain.
Because there must have been that moment, Michelle, when you want to curl up in a ball and die, not exaggerating one bit, just give up versus choosing life in that next minute. Did you have, whether it was an actual moment or a series of moments, was there a time when you said, I'm at this fork in the road to just let this be the end of me, versus what did that look like for you?
So I began going to therapy regularly. I saw a Christian faith-based counselor, and I began going to group therapy that was faith-based as well. Because in my mind, I wanted to figure out what I need to do right to fix it so it wouldn't happen again to any of my other children. And started to do a lot of things that in my normal mind did not seem right, but I felt that God was leading me to do. One of them, which was coming to a place of understanding that it was God that loved her, he loved me, and this is not what Jesus wanted for her or for me. It was learning that this is the world that we live in, and the beauty of God is that he's there to walk alongside of us and prepare the path before us on that journey. My mom and my sister came down shortly after, and they stayed with us for a few days, and they were playing worship music. And there was one song that came on in particular, and it was titled, I can't remember for sure, but one of the choruses or words in the song were, wait, I'm going to wait on you. And it made me so mad. And I told them, turn it off. I don't want to hear that right now. And a few days went by and they played it again. And it wasn't just one big moment where I was like, I'm going to go at this 100%. It was just a series of little steps that took me to where God wanted me to be. But it was between worshiping God and saying all the things that didn't feel natural. God, you're a good God. You're a faithful God. And in my mind, I would think, for everybody else but me, I would have tears pouring down my face. And sometimes I would struggle to even get the words out. So between community and worship and doing the things that didn't seem natural to do, and just falling on my face in prayer and giving God 150% by telling him what I really felt, being genuine. For a long time, I held this belief like there's only a certain way we can talk to God, like a Christianese language. And for me, it was just me bearing my soul and telling him, I'm very mad at you. And I don't know what more I need to do. I go to church. I raised my kids the best to my ability. I don't understand why you've abandoned me here. Why her? Why her? She was doing good. And, the guilt would set in for myself. Did I miss something? Was there something I should have said or could have said? Conversations. She was out a couple weeks before. This happened a couple months before, and she was with us for a couple weeks, and we hung out. We did all the girl stuff, went and shopping, and had mani-pedis, and went to lunch, and had all these beautiful talks. And I remember one conversation we had in the car. I just looked at her and I said, Alana, God's with you. He wants that relationship with you, and he craves it. So we talked about all of those things.
Yeah.
And I remember I just looked at her and I said, Alana, I don't know what I would do without you. You bring so much joy to my life. You're so fun. And we just laugh. And I couldn't live without you. And now I'm sitting here looking back, reflecting, and I'm like, but here I am. So I just had to give all of that to God. And I told him, it's not fair. And I don't know what you're doing. Do you know what you're doing? I said, I don't know what to do anymore to move forward with this. And I'm in pain and I'm fearful of harming myself. I'm fearful of disconnecting so bad from everybody that nobody will want to be around me. I was angry. I didn't have any joy anymore. What kind of a life do you expect me to live like this? That's not a life. I remember telling him, like, you just need to show up because I can't navigate this anymore. And I remember thinking to myself, what does that mean, Michelle? You're so dumb. Like, how's he going to show up? Show up in a burning bush someday? Like, those kind of things don't happen, I didn't even know what I meant, but I was like, I'm just done. I'm done. I'm over it. And picked up myself off the floor and just went about my day. A few weeks had gone by and my sister called, and they have a boat, her and her husband, and she said, we're going to take the boat out in the ocean, and it's going to be nice and relaxing, and why don't you and Jason come and we can spend some time together and maybe do a little service for Alana. And I thought, okay, maybe that'll do me some good. So we flew out and we had bought some flowers, pink flowers, because she loved pink. And we took it out in the ocean, and they stopped the boat and anchored and all that. And we were standing at the front of the boat and we were praying. My sister, my brother-in-law, his family, my mom, my dad, my husband, and myself. I had this vision in my head that I wanted to take the flowers and toss them around the front of the boat so they would just kind of surround it. And I thought in my mind, what a pretty picture that would be. And so my dad prayed, and then I walked around the boat, and it's in the ocean, so you can't just like walk freely, like you really have to hold on. And so I was tossing them as I went around the front of the boat and walked back to my husband, and I looked at the front of the boat and I told him, do you see what I see, or am I seeing things? And he said, no. And I'm like, what is it? What's going on? And the flowers had just slowly drifted together in the front, and then they formed this perfectly straight line right in the front of the boat. And I didn't know exactly what it meant. And I think I was just trying to, I don't know. I couldn't really explain what it was. And my sister, her mother-in-law, came up to me, and Juliet, and she put her arm around me and she said, Michelle, God has a word for you. And he wants you to know that no matter how rough the waters get around you, he's always going to straighten your path. Wow. And for me, that was my Elroy moment of knowing that he heard me, like he took the challenge. of showing up and going above and beyond what I thought would be pretty and beautiful. And he always takes it higher than what our expectation could ever be. And in that moment, that for me was a turning point because I thought he heard me. He heard me that day on my closet floor. He saw me. And and that made all the difference for me because I knew I couldn't do it on my own. And I knew I needed him. And I needed to know that he loved me and that the loss of my daughter wasn't something that he wanted for her or for myself, but he wanted to give me the gift of walking alongside of me and guiding me through and navigating through all of the challenges that came with having the loss of a child or somebody that you truly love. And when I got off the boat that day, I remember walking off and I just felt this easiness about my step. And I felt like I lost 1,000 pounds of just heavy heart and sorrow and just heaviness. And I just felt in my spirit, God's going to use this. He wouldn't have taken her if there wasn't a purpose or a plan for it. And it was just learning to remind myself of that every day. I mean, to this day now, it's been a few years and I still wake up and I always remember like what God did, how he showed up for me multiple times after that. I mean, that was just the first after my loss where I just felt he is really here. He's here for me. God does things so different than we do. You know, we have a certain expectation and right away we want to blame God when it doesn't go the way we planned. And if he takes something from you or he closes a door, it's only because there's something so much better on the other side. And that's hard to share with anybody, obviously, that has a grief that's fresh. But I just want to remind everybody this was a process for me, and we're just trying to condense it down to a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, and let me say this. I think it's important, Michelle, because we understand that God is sovereign, which means he knows everything that's going to happen. And in a sense, he has this absolute like sovereign control, but he is not pulling every lever and making all things happen. That confuses people religiously. And he does grieve with us, and it can leave the big question, well then why didn't you stop it, and think how many times a day he does stop things, he does prevent things. We take it for granted in a sense, but he is able to be with us in our pain. And it sounds like going from thinking he was punishing you and he's this insensitive maniacal God to understanding that he has great compassion. He's grieving with you. That's a literal miracle, lining those flowers in a straight line with that word that you got with it. So you continued to walk out, and you were so good in just now saying it was a process. I'm sure even when you had a good day, then, it can go backwards the next day. And we know that grief comes in waves. But talk to us more about where you are now, what conclusions you've come to that you didn't know going into it about God and about how his will comes to pass.
You know, I've learned so much. I've learned that you can love God and still have questions, no matter what we're struggling with. Anything we take to him, he's right there. He's right there. God doesn't force his will upon us. He gives us choices. And in the beginning of grief and during of grief, I didn't think I ever had a choice. I felt like this decision was made for me. Nobody asked my opinion. For the first time as a mom, nobody cared what I thought. If I wanted to hold off a minute, put it on pause, say things to her before God called her home, it didn't matter. I didn't have a dog in the fight. But as I worked through this journey with God, I learned that I did have a choice at some point. There was a time to grieve and be sad and have a heart that's hurting. But there was also a time where God gave me a choice. And it was, do I want to just live my life angry, miserable, depressed, be on medication? or do I want to try it through him? And I just learned that there is choice in everything we do. We may not see it right away, but there's always a choice. Even in the things that we cannot control, there will be a choice. God was not waiting for my faith to ever be strong. My faith will never be perfect. My faith will never be strong. It's never gonna not have a blemish. I am imperfect. And sometimes faith just shows up with crying and telling him, God, I don't understand. Sometimes that's your little mustard seed of faith, because it's knowing where to turn in that time of trouble and sorrow and heavy sadness. That's what he wants. He wants that. He desires that relationship with us, to give him all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly. Just being angry with him, he can take it. He designed us, he created us, and he wants that relationship, not the rules, not the Christianese. He wants our hearts. Through grief, I began to see Jesus as something so completely different than I had thought of before. His compassion and his love, even when my life is a mess, and even if I'm angry at him, he loves that. You know, when our children are small and they're struggling and they're angry, you know, as a parent, right away, we want to help. We want to be there with them. We want them to know, come to mommy. I'm going to help you. Let's get through this. And he wants the same thing from us. It's no different. And you will find peace on that journey. And I just challenge anybody who's struggling with some type of grief. If it's not working and you're struggling really bad, but you haven't given that area of your life to God and said, here, I don't know what to do with this, whether it's your marriage, your children, a relationship, your career, problems at school, give it to God. Just say, God, I'm struggling right now and I don't know what you're doing. And I'm mad at you, but you need to take this. You didn't design me to carry this. So I'm giving it to you. And I just ask that you walk alongside of me. And he's going to do every bit of that. But the crazy thing is, and the beauty of God is that he doesn't just do what our expectation is. He does even better than what we could have even imagined. So I can sit here and say, even though I don't have my daughter here with me on earth, and I do mourn her, and I still have moments where I cry and I miss her, God has given me this gift of a joy that I never had before. And it's amazing what God can do with something that I thought would have taken me out. He's just a beautiful God. And if your life is not working the way you think it should be, and you're depressed and you're anxious and you have all of these feelings, I'm just going to challenge you. Take them to God, give them to him, and tell him. As soon as I said the words, God, she's your daughter. You love her so much more than I do. And I don't know how to handle this, but you do. So I'm giving my daughter to you. That's when the work started, because he knew what the challenges were going to be ahead. And when I look back now, I have this peace of knowing that I prayed that prayer over every single one of my kids, that regardless of what this world puts out, I serve a God that's bigger, and he is going to navigate that for me, with me along the way. There are times where I've prayed with people at church and prayed with parents that have lost children or spouses, or they're struggling with addiction. I just can't even begin to describe the joy, the tears that roll down my face when I'm driving home thinking about Alana and how proud she would be to know that my mom's doing God's work. Now I can sit here and tell you, if God were to take everything away from me, even my children, I know I would hurt, and I know I would grieve, and I know I would be angry, and I would struggle. But I know that I know that I know I would be okay.
Friends, I believe all that is left to say at this point and needs to be said at this point is to share the reflection question that I have for this episode. I hope you will think about this, talk about this with people, pray about this. Here's the question. In what ways is fear causing me to attempt to control outcomes? To say it again, in what ways is fear in my life personally causing me to attempt to control outcomes? Give that the consideration it deserves, and join me for our next episode that builds powerfully on this one. God bless you.